People keep saying presidential candidate Donald Trump will self-destruct, but it's now late December 2015 and the opposite has happened. I'm starting to get very concerned because candidate Trump is following a pattern I've seen many times before in business leaders like Bernie Madoff, Ken Lay, John DeLorean, and Charles Ponzi. Now, I want to explain this. I have to say a little about myself. I'm a retired business professor. I have a doctorate in organizational behavior from Indiana University. I've taught at Indiana and Illinois organizational behavior management, but mostly strategic management, strategic decision making, the kind of thing that Trump claims to have done exceptionally well all of his life. I've published 2 books and several dozen articles in professional refereed journals. That doesn't mean I'm right, but it does mean I've thought a lot about this. I've studied hundreds of business leaders. Some were very good strategists. Some weren't so good. And then there were business leaders like Trump. Let me just give 4 examples. Bernie Madoff. Now, he operated the most massive Ponzi scheme in history so far. He stole between $20 and $65 billion, depending on how you count it. Now, he did plead guilty to protect his family. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison for fraud. But what does he really feel? His behavior since then shows no recognition at all of the harm he did, no regret, nothing. Another one is Ken Lay of Enron. Remember Enron? You might say he created and destroyed Enron through his securities fraud. He was convicted in 2006, but he died before sentence could be passed. I don't expect you to believe this, but he was a good man. If you look at the details of his life, he was a good man. People who knew him thought he was just incapable of doing this. Why did he? Well, in a way, he was sick. Another example is John DeLorean in the late 1970s. You may not know about John DeLorean, but you know the car. Bitchin' car. Delusional businessman. Especially at the end, when he tried to sell cocaine to keep his company afloat. You can read about this in Grand Delusions, 1983, by Hillel Levine. He never really accepted responsibility for his bad decisions or his illegal acts. Finally, the grandfather, Charles Ponzi, around 1920. Now, he went to his grave believing that his infamous scheme was a legitimate investment. All of these people were following a pattern. They were victims of a decisional pathology that I call the Trump syndrome. It begins with using strategic misrepresentation for whatever reason to enhance your personal brand. Then, lying or misrepresentation becomes a habit. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. Next, in order to live with yourself, you engage in rationalization. A lot of people say things like, oh, who knows what's true anyway, and that sort of thing. Then self-deception. And as you begin to believe your own lies or swallow your own bullshit, you realize that it's easier to deceive other people. That's because humans, we have a lot of ways of telling if other people are insincere. But if you believe your own lies, you can fool a lot of people much more easily. However, once you give up even trying to find the truth, the inevitable result is self-deception, and then a kind of a delusional state, and I'll call it the Trump syndrome. Now, to illustrate this syndrome, I want to discuss Trump's business career, his net worth, and Trump University. First, candidate Trump claims to be a world-class real estate developer. That's a lie. Even if he claimed to be a fairly good real estate developer, that would be a lie as well. Let's look at the period from 1991 to 2009. During that time, Mr. Trump went bankrupt 4 times. 1991, 1992, 2004, 2009. This is not the record of a world-class real estate tycoon. This is a record of a man who makes the same basic mistakes over and over. Overpaying, over-leveraging, over-borrowing, careless management, and eventual failure. Then he cynically uses the bankruptcy laws to avoid the consequences of his own stupidity. For a real estate developer, this is a shameful record. It's a pathetic record. Maybe for a grifter, it's a good record. He did convince a lot of other people to help bankroll his megalomania. But that just means he's a good con artist, not a good business strategist. I don't dispute his powers of persuasion. They're obvious from his poll numbers. Next, his net worth. He usually claims it's $8.7 billion. Recently, he said it was $10 billion. When he was called on it, he said, well, it fluctuates. Well, I suppose so, but nowhere near those numbers. The truth is closer to $3 billion. $3 billion is a lot of money. I'm impressed. Why does he feel the need to lie about it? Well, partly it's force of habit. In 2005, Mr. Trump publicly stated many times he was worth billions. In other words, $2 or more billion. Timothy O'Brien, in his book Trump Nation in 2006, correctly reported that Trump's net worth was between 150 and 250 million. The presidential hopeful then sued him, and he lost, because O'Brien basically proved that he was telling the truth and that Mr. Trump was lying. Finally, Trump University. I have heard nothing about this in the Republican debates. This was a fraudulent so-called university that Mr. Trump ran from 2005 to 2011, in which he promised to reveal his real estate investment secrets. He collected about $40 million in tuition and fees from about 5,000 students, and then closed down. In 2013, New York Attorney General filed a complaint charging that Trump's seminars constituted an unlicensed, illegal educational institution, which utilized false advertising, bait-and-switch tactics, intentional misrepresentation, and other fraudulent practices. There's also a class action civil suit by former students. One student who joined the class action lawsuit and then published her classroom experiences on social media, Trump sued her for $1 million, and he lost, of course. So now he must pay the student $750,000 in damages and legal costs. Mr. Trump has spent his life spewing out half-truths, convenient lies, balderdash, and trumpery. He has lost the ability to distinguish truth from fantasy. For example, he recently claimed American Muslims gathered to celebrate the destruction of the Twin Towers. Did this happen? Governor Christie has denied it. A reporter that Trump wrongly cited as supporting his claim denied it, and Trump responded by mocking the man's physical disability. But did it happen? No. It is absolutely impossible that thousands of Muslims gathered shortly after 9/11 and celebrated it, and that this was all covered up. Yet, candidate Trump insists that he remembers it. He's a lifelong liar, but he may not be lying this time. Research on false memory shows exactly how vivid false memories can be implanted. Look at the work of Elizabeth Loftus. Now, most of us can tell when one of our memories is absolutely ridiculous, but candidate Trump has forgotten even what the truth is. He simply cannot see how ludicrous this statement is. This is nothing else than detachment from reality. Lots of people still believe that Trump will never become president. But the closer he gets to it, the more I think about Germany in 1932. How many Germans said Hitler would never rule Germany. Am I saying candidate Trump is Adolf Hitler? No, of course not. Well, only in one small respect. Both were dangerously delusional megalomaniacs who, in times of crisis, offered their countries simplistic solutions to complex problems, and that each man had an absolutely insane view of the world, bolstered by the demonization of a religious group. For candidate Trump, it's Muslims, of course, and you know who it was for Chancellor Hitler and how that turned out. Apart from that, there are no other similarities between Herr Trump and Mr. Hitler.